distant lands our forefathers came, some seeking adventure, some bound in chains. Through battles waged and fought, through victory and pain, by test of their courage, our freedom was gained. In homage to those gone before us, the heroes of lands in the sun, we vow to join hands and to focus on building one Caribbean. Raise your voices high, sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong, feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for CARICOM. Though great and diverse be our ethnicities,
Distinguished CARICOM partners and stakeholders from academia, civil society, or Caribbean diaspora, international development partners, the media, private sector, and think tanks. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors in Washington, D.C., to welcome you to the virtual launch of this Public Diplomacy Engagement Program, PDEP. Not daunted by the multiple challenges of recent years, including the ongoing public health crisis, the effects of climate change, and the impact of natural disasters, CARICOM heads of government have resolutely persisted in their outreach and advocacy and are intent on strengthening their relations with the United States. Today's event is the product of multiple stakeholder consultations held in response to the authorization granted by CARICOM heads of government at the 32nd Intersessional Meeting in February of this year to the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors to pursue increased public diplomacy engagement with the United States. This resulting PDEP has four interrelated characteristics which constitute a platform for engagement and education, advocacy and advancement, and the promotion and protection of regional interests with stakeholders in the United States. An important element of this program is that it is a platform that will serve as a hub for the activation of indispensable partnerships with academia, the diaspora, the private sector, think tanks, and other stakeholders, all engaged in the common enterprise of leveraging, promoting, and advancing CARICOM's interests in the United States and in the hemisphere. The PDEP is a mechanism intended to strengthen the mutually reinforcing connection.
Recording in progress.
CARICOM, the CARICOM Caucus, and the Caribbean American diaspora, notably during the Caribbean American Heritage Month, celebrated annually in June, when the priorities of the region are highlighted with the intention that the result will be strategic partnerships for progressive action. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to critically consider the ideas proffered by our speakers today, even as you contemplate the examples of public diplomacy programs under the USA's Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961. In closing, the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors is pleased to share the following products of its work of the past few months and which will advance the PDEP. 1, a dedicated website with a back office repository of relevant documents, a YouTube channel on which this launch can be viewed, and of course, this public diplomacy engagement program itself. We anticipate your cooperation as we forge ahead, establishing partnerships and connections to advance the interests and priorities of the CARICOM region in the United States. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
That certainly would help. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Anthony Philip Spencer, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the US and the OAS, and Coordinator of the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors. Ms. Laura Lockman, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Western Hemisphere of the US Department of State. Your Excellency, Luann Gilchrist, Ambassador of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the US and the OAS, other members of the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors, other representatives of US government departments, representatives of international and regional organizations and academia. I want to single out members and representatives of the CARICOM family in the diaspora, ladies and gentlemen. It is really a pleasure for me to address this forum. This event by the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors for a public diplomacy engagement program had its genesis in a recommendation by our heads of government at the intersessional meeting last February. It is one of the outcomes of the deliberations over relations between the community and the United States, from which they urge a broadening of our outreach beyond USA state-to-state institutions. They recommended the inclusion of academia, labor, the private sector, think tanks, and the Caribbean diaspora. These groups were identified as the advocacy could be of assistance in advancing the region's interests. The importance of that approach cannot be overemphasized. The collective voice of CARICOM can only be strengthened by the involvement of all our people and all our friends. Time and again, we have skirted around the edges of creating a unified voice outside the realms of government that is a strident advocate for the issues of concerns to the community. A voice, for instance, that is loud and forceful enough to put the spotlight on the denial of correspondent banking to the region. A voice that makes the international financial institutions and governments from adopted homelands change course on the criteria for access to concessional development financing. A voice that demands action on climate change before global warming reaches 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which creates an existential threat to all member states. This is the significance of this forum, an avenue to spread the information that will arm those voices to go out and make themselves heard on our behalf. The themes chosen for today's discussions are very relevant to our community and constitute priority areas for actions. These are issues which can resonate with the voices that we need. I want to take this opportunity to thank President Biden for his announcement of a generous donation of vaccines to the community. We are working with his team in the White House to ensure the swiftest possible delivery of the vaccines to the community. I commend this program and look forward to it going beyond CARICOM American Heritage Month and becoming a regular feature of CARICOM diplomacy, not only in the US, but in other countries. I wish you all success, and I thank you.
Hey, good morning. I am very honored to be here today on behalf of the United States government in celebration of Caribbean American Heritage Month, and particularly to commemorate the International Day of the Tropics. To begin, I want to thank and congratulate Ambassador Philip Spencer and the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors and all of the stakeholders involved in the launch of the Public Diplomacy Engagement Program. The United States government deeply values the importance of expanding and strengthening relationships directly with people, civil society, academics, and many others in order to better understand perspectives outside government. As Secretary Blinken has stated, the ties between the United States and the Caribbean are lasting, diverse, and deep. We are not just partners, but friends. For decades, the United States has joined with the Caribbean people to promote stronger and more vibrant communities. We share many opportunities, from our strong trade partnership to our inextricably linked interests in the tourism sector, fueled by millions of American visitors every year. We share a bond based on a belief in democracy, rule of law, and the responsibility of government institutions to serve the people. This region is special because of its embrace of democracy. Our adherence to democratic values and human rights distinguishes us from many regions around the world. In addition to our shared values, common interests bind us. The United States is focusing our efforts to promote these interests by emphasizing engagement in areas of prosperity, health, resilience, security, energy, diplomacy, and education. I want to take a moment to speak directly to the issue of health, and specifically access to vaccines in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. On June 3rd, the Biden administration announced plans for the global distribution of 25 million US vaccine doses, of which approximately 6 million are designated for Latin America and the Caribbean. Later, on June 21st, the administration announced its plan for the remaining 55 million of the 80 million doses the president pledged to allocate by the end of June. Moreover, the United States is purchasing an additional 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccines and donating them to 92 low and lower middle income countries. Bilateral negotiations are taking place now, and we anticipate delivery of these life-saving vaccines to begin soon. Millions of Americans also share a love and passion for the Caribbean, its beauty, gastronomy, music, culture, without ever having set foot there. And that is because these treasures have become ingrained in our own cultural fabric through generations of Caribbean Americans and diaspora communities who have shared them, helping to create a United States as beautiful and diverse as the Caribbean region itself. Our familial ties, our shared history, and our deeply rooted beliefs were forged through hundreds of years, millions of lives, and billions of experiences. That is why I would like to again praise the Caribbean Caucus of the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors for today's launch of the Public Diplomacy Engagement Program, with its focus on diplomacy, health, and prosperity. And I also want to commend them for the work they do every day to engage, educate, advocate, and advance stronger, more effective ties between our countries and our peoples. Together, we can build upon our shared values and common interests to make our great relationship between the United States and the nations of the Caribbean even stronger in the future. Together, we can build a strong Caribbean region and work toward a hemisphere that shares our values, our goals, and our democratic aims. So thank you very much, and happy International Day of the Tropics.
CARICOM Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Excellencies, distinguished international development partner and stakeholder presenters and representatives. Happy Caribbean American Heritage Month to our esteemed diaspora community, and to everyone, happy International Day of the Tropics. From an idea at our caucus retreat 1 week after the inauguration of the Biden-Harris administration, to the agreement of the CARICOM heads 1 month later on 25th February, through 12 stakeholder consultation meetings, from which 3 principal themes emerged, we are at today's timely launch of this public diplomacy platform, developed to pursue the intent of broadening the approach to engagement with the United States beyond state-to-state relations by CARICOM. This public diplomacy engagement program will be a collaborative platform for partnerships with CARICOM stakeholders in the US, whether in good times or grueling times, as West Indies cricketers all know. This platform will also existing partner relationships and create a hub for increased connection with our Caribbean American diaspora. During the consultations leading up to today's launch, several key regional, hemispheric, and global partners and stakeholders joined the design and development process for this program. Others have been targeted for future engagement. You and your organizations can join our growing list of collaborators. Within the framework of the principal theme of our program, which is entitled A Post-COVID Caribbean Geopolitical Outlook, we will advocate for a more Caribbean-centric post-COVID geopolitical outlook at both the global and hemispheric levels, and for the perspective of our extra-regional partners to afford us greater equity and integration in the international system with a sharpened focus on the big ocean, small island, climate-smart realities of our region. Further, we will advance and promote multidimensionality and sustainability at the intra-regional level in pursuit of our resilience, growth, and development aspirations. Program activities within the framework of this principal theme of a refreshed post-COVID Caribbean geopolitical outlook will be undertaken in the context of 5 main engagement tracks that have been identified as pivotal to achievement of the objectives of this thematic area. The newest of these tracks is that of health geopolitics. So please join us in the near future and stay tuned for our events focused on this topic and other tracks in this thematic area. Within the framework of the principal theme of our program, which is entitled Adoption of the One Health Agenda in CARICOM and Strengthening US CARICOM Cooperation, we will promote the adoption and implementation of this integrative approach to improving the survivability and vitality of people in our region. We will collaborate with hemispheric partners to advance a supportive environment for implementing the One Health Agenda. And we will collaborate with global partners to advocate for the necessary facilitative arrangements, such as for food and nutrition, safety and security, with the Global Food Safety Partnership for the successful adoption of this recognized imperative. Program activities within the framework of this principal theme for the adoption of a One Health Agenda will be undertaken in the context of 10 main engagement tracks, including antimicrobial resistance and planetary health and climate change. Again, if this thematic area is of special interest to you and your organization, please join us for our events in the future. The final principal theme of our program, Accelerating Resilient Recovery, Inclusive Growth, and Sustainable Development in CARICOM. We will promote the expansion of development financing mechanisms, particularly for climate financing and resilience building, as well as for the benefits of the digital transformation of our economies with increased focus on data measurement and management. Finally, given our central focus on people, we will promote productivity, performance management, and education and skill development in CARICOM. The program activities for this principal theme on resilient, inclusive, and sustainable development will be undertaken through significant collaboration with the Caribbean Association of World Bank and IMF staff, CAWI, who has been very integrally involved in our consultations so far. And in the context of both the 5 main tracks and 3 cross-cutting threads, including the issue of culture change, we hope that our region will increasingly embrace accountability, efficiency, equity, particularly gender equity and equality, inclusion, and transparency. You and your organizations are encouraged to participate in our initiatives to pursue these goals. As I conclude, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I share this commendably inclusive, but admittedly not exhaustive, mind map of the stakeholders and issues that this program has the design capacity to address. We look forward to collaborating with you in collective, coordinated, and focused action as we seek to advance the interests of our region through this program. Thank you again for your attendance and your attention, and I look forward to seeing you at our events.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Ambassador Philip Spencer and the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors for inviting me to speak about the geopolitical outlook of U.S.-Caribbean relations after COVID-19. It's a great pleasure to speak with you today, coming from the Pentagon, where we are very committed to advancing U.S.-Caribbean relations. As you know, today's event takes place during Caribbean American Heritage Month, which President Biden recognized by proclamation on June 1st. Throughout this month, we celebrate the contributions of Caribbean Americans to strengthening the culture, traditions, and values of the United States. This event also takes place on the International Day of the Tropics, which the United Nations first established in 2016. This day provides an opportunity to increase awareness about the challenges facing tropical nations, to celebrate the diversity of the tropics, and to advance opportunities in the region. The tropics account for 36% of the Earth's landmass and are home to about a third of the world's people and 80% of the world's biodiversity. Among these regions, the Caribbean shares some of the challenges and opportunities common to the tropics. As we consider U.S.-Caribbean relations moving forward, I wish to underscore the positive trajectory we are on to further strengthen our close-knit bonds as we address the challenges and opportunities before us. I want to share with you 4 observations about U.S.-Caribbean relations after COVID-19. First, the COVID-19 pandemic and its political, economic, and public health aftermath will be felt in the region for many years to come. This means that we are at a strategic inflection point regarding the region's recovery, but it also creates an opportunity to forge even deeper bonds with our partners in the region. As the Biden-Harris administration announced earlier in June, the United States will contribute over 20 million doses to Latin America and the Caribbean region via COVAX and other bilateral engagements. This is on top of the additional 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine that will be donated and distributed through COVAX, along with a $4 billion pledge, of which $2 billion has been provided. This demonstrates the United States' commitment to our partner nations and for ending the pandemic globally with no strings attached. Second, we are on a clear trajectory to further strengthen U.S.-Caribbean relations. President Biden and Vice President Harris are deeply committed to the Caribbean and to strong U.S.-Caribbean relations. The Biden-Harris administration recognizes that prosperity and security in the United States are linked to growth and prosperity in the Caribbean. In late April, I participated in the Caribbean Nation Security Conference, known as CANSEC, which was my first international engagement since arriving at the Department of Defense. In my remarks, I emphasized the Department of Defense's commitment to strengthen partnerships in the Caribbean. The vital national interests of the United States are inextricably bound to the fortunes of our closest neighbors in the Americas. Third, after the COVID-19 pandemic, we will continue to face challenges that span our borders, including more extreme natural disasters as a result of climate change. The Biden-Harris administration is deeply interested in climate change cooperation, especially since our regional partners are particularly vulnerable. Secretary Austin has asked the Department of Defense to enhance our preparedness to address the impacts of climate change because we recognize that the climate crisis is a profoundly destabilizing force for our world, particularly in areas close to the equator. The changing environment will lead to more disasters, which will lead to instability and insecurity and drive irregular migration. Increasing cooperation on humanitarian assistance and disaster response is a priority for my office. Finally, I want to share with you that we believe the Caribbean presents tremendous opportunity. The Biden-Harris administration has established an affirmative agenda for the Caribbean. For example, we are modernizing the U.S. Caribbean agenda to leverage our friendships and build positive partnerships. we seek to increase energy and health security investments and reinforce our diaspora connections, which are epitomized by our celebration of Caribbean American Heritage Month. Recognizing our strong partnerships are the best way to advance our shared interests, and I see us prevailing against today's challenges and seizing the opportunities to move forward together. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of your program today. I wish you a successful event and congratulate all the Caribbean nations on their participation in the International Day of the Tropics. Thank you again.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In sketching the Caribbean community's geopolitical outlook, account will need to be taken, firstly, of developing trends in the global environment which impact on the community's interests, and secondly, the ongoing realities of the community's present situation in the multifaceted throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. On the international stage, multilateralism, a critical enabling mechanism for the protection and promotion of the interests of small states, continues to be eroded. This was vividly illustrated by the nationalistic response of the major developed countries to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. More recently, an effort has been made by these countries to return to the ethos of multilateralism by committing to the sharing of vaccines. The United States in particular has moved more rapidly than the others and should be commended. CARICOM will also have to navigate the geopolitical cross-currents stemming from the growing US-China competition, as well as the increasing presence and influence of non-traditional powers in the region. The continued arbitrary imposition of global standards to their advantage by the more powerful will continue to be a disruptive force for small states. Such decision-making upsets the level playing field, runs counter to equity and multilateralism, and impinges on sovereignty. An acute example of such intervention relates to corporate taxation. CARICOM member states continue to be labeled as harmful tax jurisdictions, despite their best efforts at compliance with ever-changing goalposts. The recent proposal of a global minimum corporate tax rate adopted by the G7 is a source of concern for the community's financial services sector, an important economic era. In addition to its public health effects and social impact, the pandemic has decimated the economies of CARICOM member states. The priority post-COVID inevitably will be resetting the economies of the community. However, opening and resetting our economies will require a critical first step, the building of herd immunity in our societies through widespread vaccination. This remains an elusive goal in view of the inequitable access to vaccines. Resetting will entail seeking debt relief, facilitating access to concessional and development financing, and attracting investment. At the same time, continuing to build resilience to the impact of climate change, enhancing adaptation and mitigation measures, strengthening disaster management, and attaining the Sustainable Development Goals will remain of paramount importance. The issues of security, food security, energy security, and migration cannot be overlooked. In addressing the above concerns and priorities, CARICOM will have to depend on its own efforts, such as commitment to fiscal sustainability, innovation and digital transformation, as well as the support and understanding of its international development partners and the international financing institutions. The community should also seek to build on its existing assets, such as its traditional values of democracy, good governance, and the rule of law, its human capital, its foundational platform of the CARICOM single market and economy, regional stability, and the strategic importance and the economic importance of the Caribbean Sea. We need to stop seeing ourselves uniquely as small island states and realize that we are also large oceanic territories, and thereby pay greater attention to the blue economy in our development thrust. In order to achieve its objectives, CARICOM will therefore continue to follow a balanced approach in its geopolitical outlook and its external outreach. We are friends of all and enemies of none. Strengthening our relations with traditional partners such as the US will remain a priority. However, widening our circle of external engagement will not be neglected, including opening to Africa. Diplomacy, engagement, branding, and advocacy, bolstered by speaking with one voice through the coordination of foreign policy, will continue to be of critical importance in promoting and protecting the interests of CARICOM. Acting collectively is our only source of strength and the path to success. Thank you.
Many thanks. Yes, good morning. And as we would say in some quarters, protocol has been established. So I don't think I need to go ahead and recognize everyone who are present here, and especially those who have presented. But I want to take the opportunity, of course, to thank the chairman of the CARICOM Caucus, Ambassador Anthony Philip Spencer, for his leadership. He's guided us through the last few months, and I must say, he has done so with military precision. And we have benefited from that leadership. I also want to thank my colleagues for taking this initiative on as we celebrate the Day of the Tropics, and also as we celebrate our Caribbean American Heritage Month. So pleasant good morning to all of us who are online at this time. But as we continue to struggle with our own developments, we recognize that an additional layer of challenge has been added to already very difficult situation which we as small island states have faced. While being in the tropics is indeed a blessing, and we celebrate that blessing every day, and it is also one of our major assets, as tourism is a major player in our economies. But it also brings with it the many challenges of the impact of climate change, hydrometeorological events, floods, tropical storms, hurricanes. But we also find ourselves in a situation where we are also vulnerable to earthquakes and volcanoes, as we've seen recently in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Those challenges notwithstanding, we also have unique opportunities. And I must say, I was delighted to hear Ambassador Granderson speak to the fact that we are not just small states, but we are huge ocean countries. We have territories that go far beyond our own landmass, and therefore we need to maximize the benefit. I agree with his advice that we need to focus more on the blue economy. I also hope that we can utilize the resources of our oceans to generate more renewable indigenous sources of energy using the many opportunities with which we are blessed. As a people as a Caribbean people and those who have moved to the United States and make it their home, we also recognize that we are inextricably linked to the United States. And therefore, any effort in diplomacy must, of necessity, include our own people and their efforts in assisting us, those of us, of course, who represent our governments, in ensuring that from time to time, we can pursue common interests with the United States to ensure that it redounds to the benefits of all people, both in the Caribbean and those who have made the United States their home. So this morning, it is my distinct pleasure to guide the discussion. And I am not sure, but I would say, Mr. Chairman, you will have to keep me in line. as you know that I am not a man of few words on such occasions, I will try my best to be disciplined. And I'm not very familiar with playing the role of moderator, since I like to be some protagonist or antagonist on a panel rather than guiding the discussion. But this morning we have two distinguished panelists who have made their contributions to the development of what a good friend, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, like to call our own Caribbean civilization. We are graced with the presence of Professor Richard E.A. Robertson. And Professor, I did not mention the name of Comrade Gonzalez because you yourself, you are Vincentian, but because of the tremendous contribution that Dr. Gonzalez continues to make through our own development of our own Caribbean civilization. So Professor Robertson is a renowned geologist and volcanologist in the region. He has been serving for decades as, I would say, the leader in his field in the Caribbean. And every member state has at some point benefited from his leadership, and more recently, his own home country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, have benefited from that. He headed the UA Seismic Center. The Seismic Center also is closely monitoring activities within all of the Caribbean member states. And for us in Dominica, the center is playing a very important role in advising us and monitoring on the activities as related to geothermal energy development. So Professor Robertson, I want to welcome you on this panel. And of course, I will not speak to your many achievements throughout the region, as you are well placed and everyone here knows that your reputation precedes you. We also have joining us this morning, Dr. Marcy Jagdeo. Dr. Jagdeo earned her BA in political science and a PhD in economics from Howard University, right around the corner from where most of you are today, my colleagues. And she specializes in labor and development economics. And we focus on economic migration for Caribbean nationals, looking at the patterns and the policies that influence migration. So I want to welcome Dr. Jagdeo, who is also currently a management consultant within applied intelligence practice at Accenture LLP and a short-term consultant for Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery at the World Bank. Welcome, welcome. I am not sure exactly how with the technology that we manage those things, because sometimes they don't feel that interactive. And I don't know if they could be unmuted, at least to just briefly say a pleasant good morning to all. So Professor Robertson.
Yes, good morning. I'm the host of the meeting me quite some time ago, so I'm quite here. Should I proceed or?
Well, good to see you. Good to see you. You could proceed because with
right. Okay. So thanks very much, Ambassador Henderson. And as you said, protocol has been established, so I wouldn't go through that. I was asked to give my reflections on Asufra eruption in the context of the theme of the session, which is to do with climate change, migration, and resilience. And I'll start off by saying that volcanic eruptions are inherently complex and uncertain processes. So decision-making and communication by scientists in the face of this level of uncertainty, it really requires, it's challenging, it requires us to try to synthesize and combine a range of data sets, and data sets which really are proxy signals to things that we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what's happening on the ground using not direct means, but indirect means. So it's fundamentally difficult to do. And I say that in the context of the 2021 eruption of La Soufrière, which was in a sense, a classic case of some of the challenges we faced, because the volcano went from 3 months of what's called effusive activity, which is fairly benign, it doesn't affect too much the surrounding population, to explosive activity shortly after, within a space of, and really the practical buildup within a space of 24, 48 hours. And the fact that despite this situation, we were able to have management of that situation by a group of an agency which is based in the region, which is homegrown, which was populated and led by people from within the region. And to a large extent, the crisis was managed but entirely within the region, with support, significant support externally. I think it speaks to the capacity of the region, and it speaks to our maturity as a region in this particular field. And that is quite good. So that my first comment in terms of resilience, the whole issue of resilience. I think if we want to become resilient in the region, we need to invest more in the capacities that we have existing in organizations and people, but also in resources. Because if we have that capacity built, as we have shown, I think in this situation, if we have that, then we can manage to overcome a lot of the problems that we have. It's essentially the sky is the limit in terms of what we can do if we build on who and what we have here. We have the ability to do it. We have just proven that in the context of this eruption. Secondly, I think I want to make the comment about the whole business of social dynamics in the context of the region. One of the challenges we had in the context of the eruption was that when people were asked to evacuate, it was expected that they moved with a particular kind of capacity, the ability to survive, to feed themselves for 3 days and various other things. And a lot of times they didn't do that. And one of the reasons they didn't do that is because the nature of one of the problems we have, poverty and struggles that people in some of these areas are. And if we need to move forward, we also need to deal with them. Another comment I'd like to make is the whole business of risk communication and communicating information about the hazards that people have to deal with in the region, and ensuring that that we are able to have voices in the region that can speak to them, such that people can hear people speaking to them in their own voices and can therefore understand, and we can put it in that way. And a lot of what we did in this crisis and a lot of the success of it had to do with our capacity to do that, to frame the scientific language in a way that people can understand, in a way that therefore their awareness and their consciousness of what they were exposed to. We were able to build trust, and that was one of the things that we had to do. And I think finally, I'd make a comment about the nature of the volcanic terrain that we live in. We speak and this is in the context of climate change. We speak about climate change and what the region can be affected negatively. What we need to understand is that volcanic small islands in the tropics have particular kind of vulnerabilities because of the very nature of the terrain that created them. Essentially, what we have is a volcano creates over steepened slopes, which, because of the rainfall, will tend to fail. We will also have problems with mass wastage. Volcanoes erupt from time to time, and therefore they produce material which is largely loose and fragmented that are then prone to move also. So there are certain kinds of hazards inherent in volcanic island states that we need to be aware of. But also, on the corollary, because of the terrain that they create, they also have significant benefits. So they create amazing landscapes that people want to go and live on. They have potential good benefits that the ash will have on the fertility of the land. And in terms of your tourism and attraction of people, they create landscapes that people want to come and see. So there is a double-edged sword. And again, we have to bear that in mind. So they have a number of things that I think the eruption tells us about our success in managing these situations, about our capacity to utilize the landscape that we have for our benefit. I think if we invest in the capacities that we already have and give them the resources that they need, I think there's a lot that we could do. I think I'll stop there and allow my colleague to speak.
Thank you, Professor. But I just have two questions for you that I hope you could respond very quickly, briefly. Yes. So that's recently, most of us, as a matter of fact, all of us in the Caribbean, have been impacted by hurricanes. So we look more in terms of hydrometeorological events. We look at the tropical storms and hurricanes, and we have developed over the years mechanisms to respond to those events. How can we use the same or similar approach, or in other words, to build that kind of preparedness and management of disaster, to include things like like volcanoes and earthquakes, and to ensure that we have similar mechanisms where possible to respond to volcanic eruption or perhaps earthquakes?
Yeah. Well, I think we already do. In having organizations like the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Organization, which was a key aspect in the regional response to this crisis. Management of regional problems require a regional collective effort, and enabling organizations that deal with these regional problems to survive and to thrive is key. So yes, utilizing CDMO to make sure that we have common protocols that we could utilize. I think the other thing that we have to realize is that just as hurricanes can affect multiple islands, I think one of the things that Lasufred sort of reinforced, we do it already as a scientific group, is that volcanic eruptions can affect multiple islands. So it requires us to sort of tweak some of the regional mechanisms we have already and deal specifically with the hazards that come from volcanoes. I think the structures there already is just for us to, and in fact, some of the building blocks for dealing with volcanic hazards in the region is already there. I think we just need to take the lessons of what happened now to make sure that they're much more formed up going forward in the future.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And the point you made about communication is key. I think we need to ensure that when we train our communication specialists, that they too get sort of some sort of training in dealing with issues like that. But you and your team, I think you did an excellent job in communicating. And now with the new environment we have, the access to information and the fact that there are so many things out there, people throw a lot of stuff out there. And I will come back to you later to just briefly talk about geothermal energy, drilling for geothermal energy, and the connection or not to volcanic eruptions or earthquakes. So that is something that I would like to just give you a heads up on. Now, Dr. Jack Leo, your area of focus has been looking at migration of Caribbean nationals, and clearly we all at some point have migrated, and most of us to the United States. And again, this is why the point that was made earlier by both speakers from the US government, that inextricably familiar link that we have is very strong. And all governments are aware of that. But I would just want to how is this new environment with the COVID-19 pandemic affecting issues of migration? And I'm talking about both in terms of movement of people and movement of resources. So Dr. Jaglio.
Definitely. So that's a really great question. In terms of like when I was thinking of what Professor Robertson was saying, right? So what we're seeing is more climate-induced migration, right? And so even when the volcanic eruption happened in St. Vincent, there was a displacement of 20,000 individuals, right? And that usually happens internally. But what we're finding over time, when these natural disasters are happening, right, with climate change being an imminent threat, we're seeing displacement across borders. And I guess for me, what I'm thinking, my research focused primarily on CSME. And one of the questions that I had for Dr. Robinson is sort of as we're thinking forward in post-disaster response, is migration a tool in terms of resiliency, right? So we have SEDEMA, which focuses on early response in terms of monitoring. But when we're thinking about post-disaster response, what does that look like, right? Because we have these vulnerable populations that are being impacted strongly by these disasters. And what does post-disaster response look like in the future state as we think about these migration patterns and then the vulnerable communities?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. But one thing though, in terms, I know you're focused on migration, but
right,
also at the migrants where they are, and especially in this case in the United States, and diplomacy. So I just want to make the connection.
Sure.
How do we use the fact that we have a significant population in the US? And I don't want to throw this on you because you're not a diplomat, but I'm sure you can help me to bring some greater discussion on this topic. How do we utilize the fact that we have so many of us in the United States to become a force for our diplomacy?
Yeah, and I think like what is coming to mind is like the diasporic network, right? And so many of us have migrated permanently here, but how can we leverage the diasporic network? And case studies have shown with India, they've been able to leverage their diasporic network to help create development within their country, right? In terms of like information technologies, they're coming to the United States and they're upskilling and returning, and they're upskilling their local labor force. So when I think about in terms of how can we leverage our diaspora, I'm thinking in terms of brain circulation. How can we use our network here today in terms of upskilling and moving forward in terms of development? Because we have a lot of subject matter here in the United States we're studying, we're hoping to return home, and how, or just like being here as well and have planted roots, and how we can leverage that to create development back home.
Okay, but some will argue that size matters, numbers are important. How do you respond to that?
In terms of our diaspora, or in terms of who's?
In terms of our diaspora, in terms of our numbers, because you mentioned India, for example.
Yeah, I mean, they say, well, I'm from Guyana, so I'll speak specifically to Guyana. And so anecdotally, they say there are more Guyanese here in the United States than at home. So I think we have a huge diaspora population that we can definitely leverage. And while we can't compare it to diaspora for India, I think, you know, given our huge diaspora, we can definitely leverage that. Okay, because
I know that if you have an event on the Parkway in Brooklyn, that, you know, there's not enough room for us. But exactly. I don't get the sense that the similar enthusiasm is translated into more political activism or involvement or engagement rather, and therefore being able to sort of influence what happens in the United States. Because part of our challenge, and for us as diplomats, we encounter, of course, at the point of entry that is required of diplomacy. But one of the key people that we don't meet and don't interact with and don't influence are the people who make decisions on the Hill. And how do we move them? Because, for example, you heard Secretary General Ambassador Larrock and also ASG Granderson spoke to the challenges that we continue to face with what some would call correspondent banking, with some of the issues because of actions taken by the United States Congress that are impacting on us, overreaching. Some people may say unjust, some may say, you know, that they are affecting us in sort of a discriminatory way, while other jurisdictions are protected, but we in the Caribbean are affected. How do we use our presence in the United States to seek to deal with those challenges?
That's a really tough question. So, and I may not have the best answer for that, but I think, one, I just think back, like, we think of CSME and CARICOM, like, obviously we cannot like dictate the actions of other nation states, but we can dictate the actions of our community, and how are we leveraging our member states to kind of position ourselves geopolitically to move towards development. So I don't necessarily, that's my, you know, segue trying to answer your, like, sideway trying to answer your question. I don't have that answer, but I guess just like thinking about how rich and in terms of human capital and physical capital the Caribbean is, I want to like kind of advocate that we as a region think as a community how we can leverage ourselves in creating development and prosperity.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm sure my colleagues are listening very carefully, because as we move to our own public engagement with our diplomacy, it's going to be very important as to how we engage our diaspora in the US to ensure that they assist us in meeting our own objectives. So thank you for that. I will go back to Professor Robertson, because I have this question. You know, a lot of my friends who know me will not forgive me if I didn't bring in some aspect of renewable energy and tie it up to resilience, and in particular, looking at geothermal energy and see how that impact is affected in any way by some of the recent activities in La Sofia and in St. Vincent, and how, if there is anything that we should be concerned about. And we're going to wrap up, so just make this your closing remark. Thank you.
Yes, well, I think one of the benefits of volcanism is certainly potential for geothermal, and it's something that the region has been exploring for some time and should explore. The challenge, if anything, in the context of the potential for volcanoes to erupt is that if and when you do have your geothermal, you have to bear in mind that you have volcanoes that potentially can erupt. So therefore, in terms of your plant or whatever it is you have developed, you have to bear in mind and factor in the hazards and the risk of this plant, the volcanic eruption on this plant. One of the challenges we have in the region is that there's a misconception in terms of geothermal. So one of the things that people often think of, and it happened in St. Vincent, is whether or not by exploring for geothermal while drilling the ground, whether or not you could somehow cause volcanoes to start erupting. That's something that we always have to dissuade again. The places where you're digging into for geothermal is really not interacting with magma, the source of magma that drives volcanic eruption. So one should not affect the other, apart from the fact that the volcano, if and when it erupts in the future, could affect your investment, essentially. Once you factor that into the equation, well then, you should proceed and explore as much as we can.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And that's good news for me, because I'm heading down because geothermal energy development, and I have been a champion of geothermal energy in the region. So I'm very, very heartened by that. And we are mindful of the impacts. But I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but I just felt that it was essential to talk about resilience and how do we build and recover, because we have to focus on developing our indigenous sources of energy, and geothermal is really way up front among them because of our limited land mass, and obviously solar and wind are limited, and therefore any country that has the potential to explore geothermal energy can help in that resilient recovery, and can help in the growth of our economies by totally eliminating the importation of fossil fuel for the generation of electricity in particular. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, once my apologies. Thank you, Professor Robertson, and thank you, Dr. Jagdeo. Dr. Jagdeo, sorry for being so tough with my questions, but I'm sure that you've given us some good food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning and greetings to our distinguished guests, my colleagues or partners, and our online audience. I can tell that the keynote statements and the brief yet healthy discussion we just had on post-COVID geopolitical outlook have whet our appetites. So I think we can agree that the next best step is to broaden the conversation to allow for maximum engagement and further discourse on some of the topics we've touched on. As Dr. Henderson just said, we talked about climate change, adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and migration as well. But we want to also zero in on some other crucial areas such as travel, strategic security interests, renewable energy transition, and of course, health geopolitics. So I invite you to join the dialogue through the initial thematic engagement event, and that is the geopolitical post-reopening, which is carded for October 2021. And as the chair said, this engagement will take it to the public as a form of our public engagement. And this conversation will assist in advocacy for a more Caribbean-centric perspective of the region in the emerging post-COVID global and hemispheric geopolitical outlook, as well as advance and promote the multidimensional resilience and sustainable development of the Caribbean in the intra-regional post-COVID outlook. Of course, as a caucus, we have cultivated strategic partnerships under a public diplomacy engagement program. But as you heard the speakers all said, a key partner for us is our diaspora. So we encourage the Caribbean diaspora community to call your embassies, reach out to the various diaspora organizations in your locale, but also visit the caucus's website, CARICOMCaucusDC.org. Your participation is important, and I want to coin an acronym right now. I want to say your participation is CVC, and I'm making this up. It is crucial, it is vital, and it is critical. So my public service announcement is to ask you to stay tuned for further details on the forum. Again, it is Geopolitical Post-COVID Reopening. That's going to be in October 2021. But in the meantime, I want us to remain actively engaged. And I thank you.
Colleagues and friends, warm greetings on behalf of my government and people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. As the CARICOM lead head for health, HIV and human resources, I am indeed honored to address the launch of the Public Diplomacy Engagement Program hosted by our esteemed caucus of ambassadors in Washington, D.C. The efforts to raise the profile of the region while enhancing cooperation with the United States of America and US-based partners is highly commendable. Fittingly, today, June 29th, is the International Day of the Tropics, designated by the United Nations to bring awareness to the many challenges confronting us. Foremost among them is climate change, that without focused attention and action threatens our very existence. Over the last year, our entire world has been tested by the COVID-19 pandemic, bringing unprecedented challenges for our people, decimating our tourism sector, ballooning unemployment levels, especially amongst women, young people, vulnerable groups, and considerably subverting our post-independence gains. While the pandemic has exposed flaws and weaknesses in our global systems, it also presents us with the unique opportunity to rebuild our societies post-COVID-19, with redesigned social and economic policies to build a more resilient and sustainable future, a healthy and green architecture that recognizing the cross-cutting issues of human, animal, and ecosystems health, indeed, a One Health approach. Let us also qualify post-COVID-19. There have been some 10 pandemics and public health emergencies of international concern in the past century, mostly originating in human-animal contact. COVID-19 is but the latest. Secondly, the forces driving more deadly pandemics are increasing. Human-animal contact, especially through destruction of our forests, over 1 billion international travel arrivals per year, an aging, unfit population with many NCDs, and climate change, especially speeding the spread of vector-borne and parasitic diseases. For regional and global health security, therefore, an integrated and all-of-society approach is essential, grounded in universal healthcare coverage and buttressed by strong national and regional public health capacity. With our Caribbean region on the front line, the CARICOM One Health policy was ratified by CARICOM Ministers of Agriculture and Ministers of Health in 2012 and 2014, respectively. Between 2014 and 2017, the One Health, One Caribbean, One Love program was implemented with training of 29 intersectoral leaders from 12 countries. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis is proud to have been among the country partners. This concept gained momentum when the bipartisan One Health bills were introduced in the U.S. Senate and House in the 116th Congress. Likewise, the recent G7 summit emphasized the, and I quote, strengthening of the One Health approach across all levels of pandemic prevention and preparedness, end of quote. Today, we will hear from some of our regional and international institutions and partners about their work in One Health, reflecting the global cooperation required to defeat this pandemic, improve global health governance, better prepare for any future pandemics, and to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Colleagues and friends, COVID-19 has reinforced the need for our nations to deepen the collaborative approach to addressing global challenges. Let us continue to strengthen our partnerships, working together to build the safer and brighter future for the next generation. I extend my very best wishes for the success of the public diplomacy engagement. One health, one love, one Caribbean, one world. Together we are one, and together we are strong. I thank you. May God bless your proceedings.
The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations representation in Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname is delighted to make a statement in support of the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors in Washington, D.C. in its public policy engagement program promoting the One Health agenda in the Caribbean. The FAO representation strongly supports the One Health agenda since it allows for all partners working together in tandem to address issues of health and food safety for all of our citizens across the region on a sustainable basis. FAO's role is to contribute to food and nutrition security and to reduce hunger and poverty, allowing for the achievement of SDGs 1 and 2. One Health facilitates the implementation of best practices in human and animal health across the region. It allows for lessons learned to be shared across CARICOM, thereby reducing the duplication of efforts and promoting the appropriate utilization of scarce resources. One Health facilitates a united front through joint education and the promotion of the reduction of antimicrobial use in livestock production. This, through best practices, allows the region to contribute to the global call for a reduction in the antimicrobial resistance. The One Health approach can contribute to a healthier Caribbean and the achievement of the SDGs, thereby leaving no citizen behind. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ana Marisa Cordero. I am the head of the Agricultural Health and Food Safety Program at the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity of sharing with you some thoughts and ideas regarding the importance of promoting the implementation of the One Health approach in our countries. Over the past 18 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the success of One Health, a concept which by definition is a collaborative, multisectorial, and transdisciplinary approach at the local, national, regional, and international levels has been demonstrated across the board. This disease has highlighted the connectivity between the ecosystem, animal and plant health and security, human health, and the shared environment. It has compelled ministries, agencies, organizations, and countries in our global village to form partnerships that have mounted effective multisectorial and transdisciplinary response efforts to manage the levels of infection and death rates. The continued safeguarding of the global population requires maintenance of its good health, food and nutrition safety and security, efficient management of water and foodborne diseases, as well as sanitation and hygiene, and the effective control of the development of antimicrobial resistance, among other things, and this should be prioritized going forward. This can all be achieved by employing the One Health model. Within the context of developing One Health leaders in the Caribbean, IICA, through its 10 EDF SPS Measures project, partnered with the EU-funded project One Health, One Caribbean, One Love, which was implemented by the University of West Indies in collaboration with PAHO, the FAO, and Ministries of Agriculture of Guyana, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Grenada. From this joint intervention, 36 professionals from 12 countries participated in the leadership series. Currently, These One Health leaders are active in transforming food production in their countries. It is as a result of these and other compelling reasons that IICA forges relationships with other partners, prioritizing progress and development. In the upcoming Food Systems Summit, IICA will be promoting the One Health concept as a means of transforming food system. We pledge our continued support for the implementation of the One Health concept and will continue to provide technical support to our CARICOM member states. We wish the Ambassadorial Caucus continued success as collaboration and partnerships remain central to success. Thank you so much.
The One Health approach fosters coordination and collaboration across sectors so that we can address the complex challenges that occur at the nexus between human, animal, and environmental health. In September of this year, PAHO's Directing Council will consider an important new policy document guiding One Health in the Americas. The potential benefits of One Health approach include reduced incidence of emerging and endemic diseases, improved food and water safety and security, better management of disasters, increased resilience against climate change, improved operational efficiencies, and a healthier environment. Adoption of the One Health approach and policy recommendations will contribute to sustainable economic development in the Caribbean. PAHO is committed to working across disciplines and sectors to drive key initiatives that demonstrate the value of One Health. Moreover, PAHO recognizes that One Health is important for many aspects of health, including the implementation of international health regulations, antimicrobial resistance, preparedness and emergency response operations, zoonotic and vector-borne diseases, points of entry, and risk communication. Antimicrobial resistance and vector-borne diseases, two Caribbean One Health strategic priorities through 2023, dovetail well with PAHO's ongoing priorities. Specifically, PAHO is working to develop and refine a One Health AMR priority research agenda. In the Caribbean, PAHO provides technical support to countries to develop AMR national action plans incorporating the One Health approach. With respect to management of vector-borne diseases, PAHO promotes the One Health approach to strengthen surveillance and control of diseases such as dengue and chikungunya. While the policy environment is favorable, much remains to be done to strengthen intersectoral partnerships across the health, agricultural, and environmental sectors. PAHO remains committed to working with international and regional Caribbean partners to promote the One Health approach, with a view to improving the natural environment and the health and well-being of the people of the Caribbean.
Good day, I'm Dr. Lisa Indar of CAFA. One Health is a necessary multi-sectoral approach to addressing the world's health needs through sustainable collaboration between human, animal, and environmental health. This is crucial as 75% of infectious diseases affecting humans originate directly or indirectly from animal hosts. The story of salmonella in eggs brings home this. The world has seen past events of spillovers from animals such as the Ebola virus. Now, we are witnessing more emergent infectious disease such as SARS, spillovers of influenza types, and COVID-19. We have never seen a greater opportunity for One Health action. CAFA is proud to be supporting this important initiative as we have been promoting and implemented this integrated farm-to-table One Health approach to address food safety and foodborne disease surveillance. Recognizing that most foodborne diseases are zoonoses, we have been fostering the One Health approach via collaboration, data sharing, communication, and coordination between human, animal, and environmental sectors. At the national level, between epidemiologists, laboratorians, veterinarians, and environmental health officers, between ministries of health, ministries of agriculture, and environmental health, and at the interagency level. As such, today we have built capacity in integrated early warning systems, monitoring and response, especially for foodborne disease, laboratory detection, and AMR testing along the farm-to-table continuum. The most vulnerable in the Caribbean are said to bear the greatest burden of these diseases. Luckily, many diseases are preventable by adopting this One Health approach. countries must implement a One Health approach to disease surveillance. The future of health depends on this approach. We can do it.
The emergence of infectious diseases has accelerated. Over the past 70 years, it has raised from less than 100 outbreaks per year to more than 400 since 2000. About 75% of these events have their origin in animals, including avian influenza, SARS, Ebola, and COVID-19. Most low and middle-income countries harbor hotspots for the risk of emerging infectious diseases. These hotspots are mostly driven by climate change, land use change, loss of biodiversity, urbanization, and unsustainable food systems. The One Health concept acknowledges that human and animal health are interdependent and bound to the health of the ecosystems in which they exist. One Health is envisaged and implemented as a collaborative global approach to prevent the emergence of future pandemics and reduce risks for human and animal health and ecosystem health as a whole. In the last decade, the World Bank has worked on promoting and operationalizing One Health approaches, supported by country partners, technical institutions, and donors. With a portfolio investment of over $1.5 billion, the bank champions One Health in operations locally for global health security. We believe in the potential of implementing One Health policies to strengthening public health systems and contribute to economic development at both regional and national levels. One Health strategies are highly cost-effective. One Health improves the effectiveness of core public health systems, substantially reducing morbidity, mortality, and economic costs of outbreaks. The World Bank congratulates CARICOM in its efforts to adopt a CARICOM One Health policy, collective action to prevent emerging health risks by improving cooperation and coordination of disease surveillance and preparedness, can support country-led efforts to reduce risk and increase the resilience of the health systems to better prevent and control infectious diseases outbreaks as well as antimicrobial resistance.
A very good morning to you all. The University of the West Indies, with its 5 campuses spanning the entire Caribbean region, is very excited about supporting this public engagement agenda going forward. We agree with others that it is critical for our region to adopt a One Health approach to more efficiently and effectively address many of the complex and wicked health problems that we are facing at the interface between human, animal, and environmental health. Recognizing these connections between our health, the health of plants and animals, and the health of our shared environment is at the heart of One Health. And working collaboratively across disciplines and sectors to address these issues is critical. At the University of the West Indies, we work on many of the areas mentioned that demand a One Health approach, and we are actively promoting One Health across the Caribbean region. Through a European Union-funded project partnered with PAHO, ICA and the FAO, as well as the Ministries of Agriculture in Grenada, Guyana and St. Kitts, we have trained a cohort of 30 interdisciplinary One Health leaders from 12 Caribbean countries. And through another EU-funded PAHO-implemented project that we are in the process of carrying out, we are training our first cohort of climate change and health leaders following a One Health approach. So we really look forward to working closely with our Caribbean and US partners, including the One Health Commission, to continue in our mission to roll out the One Health approach across our region, in our schools, in our universities, and in our governments. So thank you so much to the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors. I can assure you that the University of the West Indies is definitely on board and fully behind this public diplomacy engagement program. Thank you.
Thank you, partners. Climate change, ecosystem destruction, loss of biodiversity, emerging infections, all challenges to global health security and sustainability, all threats to lives and livelihoods, all imperatives that clamor for multi-sectoral and transdisciplinary action. Stay tuned, therefore, for our collaborative thematic presentations focusing on the One Health agenda. The first comes in September on planetary health and climate change, including soil management. And the second will be held in the fall on chronic non-communicable diseases, of course, to include mental health. In embracing and thanking all our partners, the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors in DC declares, in the words of the song by the Carpenters, we've only just begun. And as you heard previously, there is much work to be done. So we urge you, therefore, to stay connected, stay committed, stay in support of One Health, One Caribbean, One Hemisphere, One World, and One Love. Thank you, and God bless you.
Good morning to you all. Good morning to you all. Can you hear me? On behalf of Prime Minister Motley, his keynote statement at the virtual launch of this CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors Public Diplomacy Engagement Program. Good morning to you all. Happy International Day of the Tropics and this important month, Caribbean American Heritage Month. In my capacity as the CARICOM Head of Government with lead responsibility for the single market and the economy, and also as chair of the joint World Bank International Monetary Fund Development Committee, it gives me great pleasure to address you at this very important gathering. Public diplomacy is the hugely significant variable in any diplomatic success plan. This launch in this segment, dedicated to the principal theme of the CARICOM Public Diplomacy Program in Washington, and focused on accelerating resilient recovery, growth, and sustainable development in CARICOM, succinctly captures the major development tasks before all of the nations of the region at this critical juncture in our socioeconomic development evolution. The mandate for the CARICOM Caucus in Washington that emerged from the 32nd Intersessional Meeting of CARICOM Heads of Government advocated that there be a broad approach to engagement with the US beyond state-to-state relations, seeking to include academia, the labor, and the Caribbean diaspora. I have always thought, however, that this has forever been the broad mandate of every CARICOM envoy in Washington, whether we pursue this directive individually or collectively. This is essentially what their work must be about daily. That stated, what must be communicated at this time to all actors at all levels in the US society is that the beleaguered states of the community, some of the most indebted developing states in the world, had been under severe economic development pressure long before the coronavirus pandemic shook the very foundations of our existence. Truth be told, before the pandemic, many of the countries in our region had already started to take the necessary measures to restore the health of their national balance sheets. Coming out of the global recession of the early 2000s, many of our states have started to recover economically, only to be hit with the double crises of COVID-19 and the climate change issues. The fact is that we have been served a double crisis with which to contend, plunging our economies into even more dire straits, threatening the lives and livelihoods of the 8 million people in the Caribbean. We have essentially been struck by the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time. Let it be clear, however, that whenever COVID-19 has been removed from our landscape, we will return to dealing with the greatest existential threat, climate change and its effects. All of the economies of the Caribbean community, except Guyana, have experienced double-digit declines in the last 18 months, mostly because of the precipitous fall in tourism and travel revenues on which most countries are so dependent. The fact is that we have been unable to substantially reopen our economies even at this stage tells the full story. Ours is a daily battle to find the correct formula to address two grave situations that we have not created and have contributed little to. Yet we are paying an enormous price for the actions and neglect of others. The major issue that is therefore in our minds is how do we continue to grow our economies in the midst of these crises while still protecting our citizens, particularly the most vulnerable. I begin in this deliberate manner to draw attention to the reality that apart from confronting the pandemic, the size and scale of the climate adaptation necessary for small developing countries of the region, mostly with coastal cities, is very much underappreciated. How do we plan our future existence? How do we change minds? How do we successfully ensure? The answer to these questions confounds our leaders every day. Bluntly stated, how do we finance this necessary adaptation? How do we balance the need to protect the most vulnerable in our communities while still seeking to develop their minds and their bodies? Government's first priority must be to protect the most vulnerable, or poor or elderly, and we cannot do so successfully in the prevailing climate if we are forced daily to answer the situations which are not of our making. First, to ensure that we do successfully and resiliently rebuild our societies during this period must be access to the coronavirus vaccine. Whilst there has been much discussion and numerous promises made, it has been hugely difficult for our countries to acquire these life-saving drugs in reasonable quantities and at affordable rates. We therefore express our thanks to the Biden administration for the commitment to donate 20 million doses of the coronavirus vaccines to Latin America and the Caribbean. What the region also needs is the fiscal space to finance our very difficult existence. Our countries have found it increasingly taxing to earn a living in the past 18 months. When we seek to borrow to shore up our development prospects, many of us are confronted with the reality that the international financial institutions consider us to be middle-income states not eligible for concessional financing, based on a skewed metric of per capita income levels that does not consider our very vulnerable and fragile existence. What is needed indeed is the creation and development of a multidimensional vulnerability index that can be utilized as a broad criterion for creating our potential and ability to access financial assistance from the IFIs. This index should be developed through the collaboration of the IFIs and our governments. The index should readily lead to more affordable financing for the region, spurring future economic growth that will not only assist us, but will also support enterprises in the US, given our trade patterns and other commercial activities with the United States. One of the major solutions to our challenges are international financial institutions not only more conscious, but more sensitive to the needs of small developing states. We are not indispensable and we simply cannot be forgotten. As we continue to develop and diversify our economies, we need new and innovative financing mechanisms and debt instruments at more affordable rates that recognize our vulnerabilities and that contain natural disaster clauses. This is the only way that we can finance and ensure our existence. We need to also ensure and insure that existence. Global insurance rates must be more affordable and the globe must come together to assist. In our case, we are the US's third border. All that we do and how we develop has the capacity to affect the United States of America. In this uncertain economic environment, we therefore welcome the US $650 billion in the proposed increase in special drawing rates allocation of the International Monetary Fund, most recently referenced and championed by the US Secretary of the Treasury. However, the question is, will the reallocation be enough to meet the needs of the world's poorest countries to fight and truly recover after the pandemic? Concomitantly, will the increased amounts and its reallocation be enough to further finance the ongoing development needs of these impoverished states? Although there are many issues now confronting us, these matters take priority. Ours is a constant battle to seek novel ways to ensure a safe and secure existence for all citizens, and primarily the most vulnerable members of our societies. The time to take decisive action on the aforementioned issues is now. I extend very best wishes to you for the success of your public diplomacy engagement program, and I wish you all a very good day. I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to represent the Caribbean Association, the World Bank and IMF staff in this, what I would call teaser event, virtual launch of our public diplomacy engagement program, which is really to encourage the diaspora to become more actively engaged in discussions, which will help to foster improved development and leverage our current position in the US, but beyond the US, to really help to advance the development of our region. With this in mind, I would like to, and following on from Ambassador Lynch's opening remarks on behalf of Prime Minister Motley, I would like to indicate we are a resilient region, but the increasing frequency of climate-related events and now COVID are testing us. The COVID pandemic has set us back many years. At the same time, I would also say that there's a silver lining because it has catapulted us into a more digital world. With this in mind, we have two topics and we have two distinguished speakers to flesh this out a little bit more for us. Starting off, we have Ms. Tassin Syed, who is going to be providing some insights on development financing and resilience building in the region, as well as her thoughts on how we can be doing a little more as a region to improve our resilience and position ourselves for growth and development. We also have the pleasure of having Governor Timothy Antoine to provide insights on how the CARICOM region can leverage digital transformation as a catalyst for growth and development, as well as provide some insights on some measures that have already been taken to put in place and to put us in a good position towards digital transformation, because there are activities that are going on as we speak. I want to give a little bit of insight on Tassin's background. So Ms. Syed is the World Bank Country Director for Caribbean countries. I'm sure many of you know of her. She's been very active and very supportive of the region through various efforts. So she is responsible for maintaining the solid partnership with all the countries in the region and their development and financial challenges. Prior to this, she served in various management positions in the Europe and Central Asia region, as well as the South Asia region of the World Bank. So she brings a wealth of experience to our region. And she's a seasoned development professional with over 20 years of operational and leadership experience at the World Bank. Governor Antoine assumed duties as the third governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in February 2016. And he's an economist and development practitioner by training, experience, and passion. Before assuming office of the governor, Governor Antoine had a 22-year distinguished career with the government of Grenada. He also, between November 2005 and November 2007, served as advisor to the executive director of Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean at the World Bank Group. So he brings insight and knowledge of how this IFI works as well. So to Tassin, I'm going to hand over to you, so if you can provide your insights. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Zinga. It's a pleasure to join here, and I'm seeing so many familiar faces and friends, so thank you so much for including the World Bank in this very important activity. You have suggested a really key topic for me to touch upon. When we look at the issue of building resilience and situated in the context of development financing, whether from the World Bank or other partners of the Caribbean, I think a key situational point I wanted to raise, which has been mentioned by several speakers before me in the context of One Health, is really the COVID context. Because you see the COVID context, and it is critical to keep in mind that when we are talking about resilience building and financing in a region, which was already deeply and sharply impacted by climate change impacts and natural disasters. And you have the third dimension, which is now the COVID, and recently, as you saw, the volcanic eruptions in St. Vincent and Grenadines, reminding us that we remain in the midst of really critical vulnerabilities for this region. So in that situation, in that context, what are some of the key elements that I thought I could touch upon today? I'm not going to say anything new that, the very honorable ambassadors and other technical colleagues are not aware of. But just to put it together, first is really the preparedness dimension for resilience building. And the pandemic has heightened, as we know, the region's vulnerability, and preparedness is now more important than ever, not only for disasters, but any eventuality. And key part of the preparedness, at least from the perspective of where the World Bank is looking at the region, is to put in place sufficient or adequate risk financing strategies that combine different risk transfer and risk retention instruments to ensure that if something happens, not necessarily a natural disaster, any kind of crisis, there is some financing available to respond to emergencies. And when I mention this risk transfer or risk retention, I'm talking about contingent lines of financing, such as the catastrophic drawdown option that the World Bank offers, and several countries in the region have adopted those, such as Grenada and St. Vincent and Grenadines, the parametric insurance CRIF that we are all familiar with, and to share with the ambassadors today that the World Bank is also well advanced in working towards a catastrophic bond, a CAT bond, which will to place in the market for one of the countries, and we hope this can lead to further initiatives going forward. The second dimension I wanted to highlight is really the human dimension. And I think that is absolutely important because mechanisms have to be in place to support affected populations when facing vulnerabilities. I now am using the word vulnerabilities as opposed to natural disasters because we have seen what COVID has produced and how population has been affected. Some of the surveys that we did, telephonic surveys, demonstrated in small islands, about 70% of the population impacted their lives and livelihoods with COVID. So in that context, the greater role and heightened use of better and more transparent and more available social protection systems is extremely important for crash transfer programs in case of an eventuality, bad thing that can happen, to expand vertically for increasing the benefit value and also horizontally to expand the number of beneficiaries. There is a substantial room for improvement in this area, but it's important to focus on this for reaching the poorest in building resilience. The third angle I wanted to highlight is really the fiscal implication and the fiscal angle, and which is the sharp increase that we are seeing already in already high debt to GDP ratios. In COVID context, on an average, it's increased by 10 percentage points. So the Caribbean countries, while being also the world's most indebted, do have limited fiscal space, hence the important role of fiscal and debt sustainability. And that I'm really pleased to share with you, ambassadors and excellencies, that the World Bank is advancing that agenda quite actively along with other partners, the IMF included, and other development partners, to support the countries. And we are engaged in deep policy engagement in at least 7 or 8 countries in the Caribbean on this front. The fourth point I wanted to highlight is the diversification angle. And the diversification dimension. Building resilience means not only building back better or looking at the other dimensions I highlighted, but also creating, and as we have learned in the region in the last year and a half, over time, the ability of the economies to strengthen diversification where possible. And let me mention a few examples, such as within the tourism sector, what can be the diversification offerings? Second, what could be done to protect, for the protection and sustainable use of ocean resources, otherwise known as blue economy, and developing new sectors. I shouldn't say new sectors, but sectors that have not developed as well yet in the Caribbean. And the key ones are really renewable energy. And that was touched upon earlier when I was listening to the discussion between Ambassador Henderson and another colleague. And the other is digital technologies, where I think Governor Antoine is going to talk about. And linked to that, how best the skill development can happen to bring in not just diaspora, but also the internal, very strong youth of the region to have the skills to evolve and respond to the demands of the emerging economy. Underscoring all of the above is really the role and the partnership of the private sector. Governments have a key role, we know, to play in all these areas, but critically in improving the regulatory environment for businesses, in reducing risks of investments in innovative sectors such as renewable energy, ocean resources, blue economy, and digital. And honestly, private investment is critically needed. It has been an issue because of economies of scale or absence of economies of scale, but that does not mean that the opportunity does not exist. It does exist with better data, better regulation, more reliable institutions, and a strong financial sector. Indeed, with also the right infrastructure, including, very importantly, the digital infrastructure. Again, I'm sure Governor Antoine will touch upon these matters more. A final point I made, which is not a point linked to the resilience agenda, but really what the World Bank is doing in all this, I'm extremely proud to share, and really proud and delighted also that all of what I'm sharing with you just now is not just rhetoric, but it's backed by strong, not only financial support, but analytical support from the World Bank Group side as well. In the last year and 2 months since April 20, we have substantially, in fact, tripled our financing for the region and brought in over $1 billion worth of financing for the CARICOM member countries. And over this period, $600 million purely in support of COVID-19 response and recovery. And not only health response, but also for medium-term structural, fiscal, and policy reforms and resilient reforms. And I'm really pleased that our policy engagement in the region has not only is anchored on investment projects, but also on development policy operations, budget support engagement, and front-loading our concessional financing, which is IDA resources for 6 of the eligible countries in the CARICOM. So the potential is huge, and I know Prime Minister Mia Mottley was supposed to be here. She's not here, but I do want to share with the excellencies that for after a gap of many years, the World Bank brought in exceptional financing to Barbados and the Bahamas. Both countries had graduated from World Bank financing, and because of the COVID situation, the World Bank provided exceptional support of $100 million each to the 2 countries. And this is extremely important because the last time this was done by the World Bank was in 2008 for only 1 country in Europe after the financial crisis. So the commitment from the World Bank is huge for the region, and you will see it rising in the coming years, and both in depth and breadth. And I do want to say that for me, it's a very important day because it's my last day, second last day in this position. I'm handing over to my successor, who's going to be joining on July 1. And I'm delighted that I could have this opportunity to see so many friends this morning. Thank you very much, Zinga.
Thank you so much, Tessine. It has been great collaborating with you over the years. We've been very lucky to have you as our country director for the Caribbean region. And we look forward to hearing more things from you and to continue to keep you at bay. Tessine, one additional follow-up question, given that this diplomacy forum is trying to engage the diaspora, do you have any thoughts on how we can encourage the diaspora to become more active in supporting the region, whether through the private sector or helping to create markets within the various localities where they are? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, indeed. I mean, and I'm going to be, I know we are in a diplomatic forum, but I'm going to be maybe perhaps not too diplomatic and be open about it. Diaspora is in the last met so many of the colleagues who are in the diaspora right now. It is fine to say as a rhetoric, the interest and the desire to invest back in, but there are 2 things important. One, there has to be a tangible opportunity to do so. And number 2 is that tangible opportunity should be clearing the roadblocks, not adding to the roadblocks. What do I mean by that? That what I referred to in my comments as well, that the regulatory environment, in some countries, by the way, also environment is extremely important. I hear that, I heard that a lot in 1 or 2 of the countries where security was an issue, that for the diaspora to come back in, they were concerned about that. So I would say that if there are tangible opportunities opening up, and there are two big ones, or three big ones, I think are, one is the digital, second is on the renewable side, where a diaspora, in terms of diaspora, which is able to invest in a big way and bring in a consortium of investments, and there are people who can do that. And the third is, of course, the diversification within the tourism sector. And I'm thinking of the blue economy and ocean resources in that respect. But again, something tangible, not just rhetoric of, diaspora coming in, but an offering which is backed by a facilitation rather than roadblocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tassim. I'm glad that you mentioned something tangible, because indeed, if we have mechanisms available to support engagement, then that is what is going to help to encourage, further engagement by the diaspora. And through this public diplomacy program, this is something that we're aiming to establish. So we have an appeal to all of the persons in the diaspora out there to continue to engage with us in this public diplomacy program to see how we can create mechanisms together to facilitate increased engagement. Now I will invite Governor Antoine to provide some insights on digital economies and transformation, because there's a lot of work that he is doing in this area. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zinga. So Dwight would be proud. So Excellencies, development partners, kudos to all concerned for this initiative. So I want to start with something I say in the central bank all the time. We cannot change our history. We cannot change our geography, but collectively we can elevate our development trajectory through innovation and collective action. I want us to be very clear. Digital technologies afford CARICOM countries, many of which are small states, a fighting chance to compete and thrive in the global economy. A fighting chance. They are really the great equalizer. They level the playing field. And so we must embrace digital technologies, because that's the future of the global economy, and that future is now. One of the lessons of this pandemic is really the criticality of connectivity and digital tools. In fact, the pandemic has laid bare the digital divide between the connected and the unconnected. And there is no place where we've seen it and felt it most than the impact on the education of our children, many of which are writing exams as we speak. So how then should we proceed? My submission briefly is that it should be collaborative, and we should pay careful attention to the pillars of the digital economy. So first, infrastructure, and that includes connectivity, digital identity, cybersecurity, and of course, data protection. To ensure digital citizenship, our governments must adopt a policy that ensures that connectivity is treated as a right, not a privilege. This is very important. Very, very important. Because for too many in our region, connectivity is inaccessible, and for others, too slow and too expensive. And that is something we want to address. I also want to recognize the fact that, and by the way, the US itself is dealing with this issue right now with its own infrastructure plan. I would like to see our CARICOM ICT ministers come together and put down an aggressive timetable to deliver a single ICT space in our region. It is long overdue. So there's the first issue of infrastructure. Then there's the matter of platforms through which governments, for example, public sector agencies, including central banks, are able to offer citizen-facing services to the public. Beyond the ease of doing business, this is important for building digital trust. And make no mistake about it, we have a lot of work to do where that is concerned. Some of it is constitutional, some of it is cultural. We have to address those. And public sector agencies can play a lead role in helping to build digital trust. The next area of the pillar approach would be digital finance. And that bundle includes payments, access to credit, and of course, literacy. payments, access to credit, and literacy. I mean, 1 in 3 persons are financially literate. That means 2 in 3 persons are financially illiterate. So you can't do digital and do payments and all of that without addressing financial literacy. And that is why, for example, we were motivated at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to launch our digital currency, Dcash, the first monetary union in the world to actually launch a digital currency. And that is to assist us with the issue of financial inclusion and empowerment. And our region is leading because Bahamas would have launched a digital currency last year following Hurricane Dorian. We did it at the first of the monetary union. And clearly we are leading the way because we have a felt need and we are motivated to address those needs. We do not have advanced payment systems as is the case in North America and in Europe. And so that is a major issue for us. But there's also the concern about access to credit for small businesses, which is why, you know, this issue of digital finance is so important. And then there is the issue of digital skills and entrepreneurship. We have to ensure that our people are not merely consumers in the digital economy, but producers in this digital economy. That's the way we will earn our living. That's the way we will earn our keep. That's the way we will earn foreign exchange, not simply expend foreign exchange. So that is very, very important. And it starts with our children, which is why, for example, our central bank has, for the last 4 years, done scholarships in STEM and also internships in that area. Because we recognize we have to lay that foundation for digital citizenship. We have to lay that foundation for our children and for small businesses, many of which are now headed by women, to be able to actually make their mark, earn a living, create employment, generate foreign exchange, and grow our economies, become a source of wealth creation, as it were. And so those are the pillars that we want to be addressing as we look at how we're going to build out a digital economy in our region. I want to conclude by simply inviting the US government, which, as I said, is now working on its infrastructure plan. And we encourage that because we think it's important for the US and indeed for our region. We want to see development institutions like the World Bank and the CDB and the IDB also become involved. Because as Professor Mazzucato, Professor of Innovation, says, we should be investing in public returns that are greatest. That is innovation. And therefore, we will do well as a region to put our limited resources in the area of innovation, combined with, of course, our development partners. And I want to conclude by thanking the World Bank and Tassine in particular for a very important initiative that addresses some of these issues within the context of the OEC as the ECCU through what we call a Caribbean Digital Transformation Project. That project was approved by the World Bank last year, $94 million US, $8 million at the regional level. And together with the OECS, ECTEL, CARICOM Impacts, and ECCB, we are coming together, collective action, to actually help deliver on several of these pillars. Finally, Tassine, thank you. You have been a great friend and partner to our region. One of the things we've always known about your work in this region, Tassine, is that you cared, and it showed in your diligence and in your delivery. And we wish you God's choicest blessings as you move on. Thank you. Zinga, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Governor Antoine. I will pose a similar question to you, Governor. How do you feel the diaspora can play a part in this digital transformation of the region?
We see several areas. Obviously, advocacy and activism is very important to ensure we have the requisite policy and legal framework to support the digital economy. But we also see investment. The reality is that in digital finance, the largest mortgage lender in the United States is Quicken Loans, not one of those Wall Street banks. There is significant resources, we believe, that the diaspora can bring to this enterprise of digital finance, and frankly spoken, even renewable energy, which was talked about earlier. And so we see the diaspora as we see, I mean, let me give a simple example. In the United States, 1 in 2 citizens are invested in the US stock market. In our region, that number is perhaps 1 in 20, if all that. We believe that there are opportunities in our region for the diaspora to do good and to do well. And we want to create vehicles for them to do that. And one vehicle that we're working on right now, which is not digital technology, but renewable energy, is to be able to see how we can get some of those resources around. So we think the diaspora can help with activism and advocacy, but also with finance. And those are two areas, and I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Governor. And now I will hand over to Ambassador Ho. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank the presenters. The enlightened presentations have been comprehensive and most instructive. I would like to take the time out also to express a special thanks to Dr. Marcy Jagdeo. I happen to have had the honor and the privilege of serving on a PhD dissertation committee last year. And there she caught my attention because she was thorough in her approach, very enthusiastic, and did the required empirical work, which I think is very important. As perhaps the youngest member of the group who presented today, I think the youth are very important. And it's very important that we had an opportunity for hearing from Marcia and there are a few others out there also, a few of them at Howard University, who are also doing quite well in addressing some of these complex issues that we'll have to confront in the COVID-19 period. I am very much concerned about the difficulties that we're having with respect to raising our income levels across the region. We are pretty much at the same level where we were, say, 30 years ago. The ordinal ranking of per capita income has not markedly changed over the years. Indeed, the Bahamas, which is at the head of the class 30 years ago, remains at the head of the class today. And there are very few other countries that have broken out of the pack. In the case of the Bahamas, the per capita income is $37,000. In Singapore, it's $90,000. It demonstrates to me the challenge that lies ahead for us, because unless we're able to raise that income level, we will not be able to draw the folks in the diaspora who are earning at much higher income levels who we'd really like to bring back home to work and to deliver for us. So that's a continuing problem. We also find ourselves not in a position to deal with our debt ratio difficulties that we're having, or correspondent banking obstacles that are strewn in our path. The vulnerability index has been slow to being introduced. And of course, we recently have heard of the global minimum tax of 25% across the board. It's probably now down to 15%, which is going to wreak utter havoc with our member states across the region. So that is a problem, continued to with the intent to punish the rich, if you will. That's a colloquial expression that's often reached by actually taxing them to extraordinary levels, despite the very high contributions that they're already making. So those are matters for us that are of great, great concern. As we go forward then, I noted that in terms of addressing the issues of income and prosperity, I reviewed recently a study done by for the William G. Demas lecture. There were 21 presenters, and only one of those presenters referenced the word productivity. That word is very important to the points that Governor Antoine just made, because as a matter of fact, when I see him at World Bank meetings, I often put him aside and he knows me to be the productivity person. So that's one of the main areas of focus. But that one person that addressed the issue is Professor Amar Baidi of the Cayman Islands. He sent a very clear message to the region by stating thus: widespread prosperity requires widespread productivity. For me, it is a very short step from going from widespread productivity to achieving the levels of income that we need. Because what I believe is missing across all of the great speeches that we've been hearing over the last 30 years, and again today, they miss a very important point. Governor Antoine came very close when he spoke of innovation. I would simply like to point out that in addition to that, in order to get our most productive persons to innovate and be creative, we have to introduce for them an incentive-driven compensation program that recognizes the most valuable player who has innovated in the various areas, compensate him well, reward him handsomely. This is not new for the public sector, incidentally. The Office of Personnel Management, with whom I worked for some time, has in place an incentive-based compensation program. So too does the Canadian government. It's very much there. And in the US, every private sector company of $10 million or over operates under an incentive-based compensation plan, not only for its top executives, but for the entire rank and file class. So I think that's the area that's missing, and I'll certainly hope that along the way, whether it's addressed in the upcoming hearings or in other forums, that we do focus on this. We cannot neglect those persons that are operating at the highest level. The standard that we have in place right now, in the government in particular, we have pay bands in which each person within the pay band receives the identical paycheck. That is a disaster for our economies, and it's going to keep us trapped at the level in which we are. We have to have a structure that recognizes rewards that are commensurate with your performance level. And that's what the incentive-based compensation does. When we do have that in place, we'll be able to attract more folks from abroad in the diaspora coming back home. We'll also be able to reduce the number of persons that tend to migrate from places of low income, which are a real problem, because once they leave, once our best and brightest leave, we're left with a residual labor force that is not very productive. So I'm looking forward very much to the session that comes up in October 20th and 21st, and hope that some of these issues and others will be addressed at these sessions that are upcoming. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Distinguished CARICOM partners and stakeholders from academia, civil society, our Caribbean American diaspora, international development partners, media, private sector, ladies and gentlemen, good morning from sunny Trinidad and Tobago. The launch of this timely public diplomacy platform has realized the intent expressed by CARICOM heads of government at the conclusion of their 32nd intersessional heads of government meeting. That intent is to broaden the approach adopted by our region to strengthening relations with the United States of America beyond state-to-state relations. This expanded framework for public diplomacy partnership between our multi-sectoral, global, hemispheric, and national stakeholders in the United States and those in CARICOM member states promises increased promotion and protection of our mutual interests, as was emphasized by our CARICOM Secretary General. The magnitude of the possible impact of this new public diplomacy hub for strengthening the connection between Caribbean American diaspora institutions and influencers and our CARICOM diplomatic representatives to leverage those relationships to enhance advocacy for and advancement of our region's interests and priorities in the United States was reiterated by the acting Deputy Secretary of State in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. The strategic focus of this new initiative for strengthening U.S. CARICOM bilateral cooperation is also clear, with the intent to enable improved agility and acceleration in the achievement of our region's most urgent interests, as was so compellingly outlined by the Honorable Prime Ministers who addressed us earlier in this launch. Those existential priorities are outlined in the three principal themes under this particular program. First, securing our stability as a peaceful region in the post-COVID Caribbean geopolitical outlook. Second, improving our survivability and vitality as a productive people through the adoption of a One Health agenda. And third, accelerating the achievement of resilience and prosperity in our process of equitable recovery, inclusive growth, and sustainable development. I trust that you share my increasingly optimistic outlook that this public diplomacy engagement program will strengthen U.S. CARICOM relations, which is its primary objective. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I express the appreciation of the CARICOM region to each and every one of you, individual and institutional partners and stakeholders in the development and deployment of this potentially transformative public diplomacy platform. I also acknowledge the role played by the CARICOM Council on Foreign and Community Relations, COFCO, and by the CARICOM Secretariat, in particular, the Assistant Secretary General for Foreign and Community Relations. Finally, I wish to commend the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors in Washington, D.C. for its collective, coordinated, and focused action to create this excellent response to an intent expressed by our region's heads of government just 120 days ago on February 25th, 2021. As the emissaries of our small countries in a very large capital, our ambassadors have embraced the power of working together. And I take this opportunity to remind them that their efforts for our CARICOM region are recognized and deeply appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance and attention, and for your ongoing support for the engagement events that will be hosted under this program in the coming months. Thank you, and God bless you. One health.